You know that in this mechanic work you come across all kinds of people, but what happened to me recently on a night call really has no name. Imagine being in the middle of nowhere, at midnight, helping a stranger who was stranded and who, as soon as the car started, simply accelerated and left me there alone without saying a word or paying me a single dollar. Stay with me, because I am going to tell you exactly what happened and what it taught me about real roadside service. It was close to midnight when my phone rang from a number I did not recognize. I had already cleaned up, sat down, and was ready to shut my brain off for the night. Most people do not realize that when you do mobile mechanic work, your day does not always end when the sun goes down. Cars do not choose convenient times to fail. Still, I usually do not answer unknown numbers that late because nighttime calls can be risky and they often turn into long headaches. But the phone rang again, and when I picked up, I could hear panic in the guy's voice. He told me he found my number from one of my online ads where I list mobile diagnostics and roadside repair. He said his car had died on a dark stretch of highway and that he was on the shoulder with barely any light around him. He kept repeating that nothing worked, not the dash, not the headlights, not the interior lights, and the engine would not even try to crank. The way he described it sounded like a total power loss, not a normal no start where the starter spins, but the engine will not fire. I asked him a few questions to narrow it down before I even left my driveway. I asked what he was driving, what year, whether he had any recent battery issues, whether he hit a pothole or a bump right before it happened, whether he smelled something electrical, and whether the car shut off gradually or instantly. He said it was instant, like someone cut the power. That is usually not a fuel issue, and it is usually not an internal engine failure either. Instant shutdown with dead electronics is often a battery connection, a main fuse, a ground strap, or a critical power distribution problem. I told him to turn on his hazard lights if he could, to stay inside the car if it felt safer, and to text me his exact location. While he did that, I grabbed what I always grab for a late call. My tool bag, a headlamp, a multimeter, a couple of adjustable wrenches, a small ratchet set, wire cutters, a wire brush, sandpaper, spare terminals, and some tape. I also grabbed a reflective vest, because on a highway at night you cannot trust that drivers will see you. On the drive over, I kept thinking about safety first. I've seen people change a tire with their back to traffic, and all it takes is one distracted driver for it to turn into a tragedy. I also kept thinking through the likely failure points so I could be efficient when I arrived. When I got close, I saw a car on the shoulder with hazards blinking, but the blink looked weak and uneven. That told me the car was either running on a low battery or losing connection. I parked behind him at a safe distance, turned on my hazard lights, and angled my car slightly so it created a protective buffer. The guy was outside pacing with his phone in hand, shoulders tight, eyes scanning the darkness like he did not want to be there another minute. I told him to stand on the far side away from traffic while I looked under the hood, and I kept the tone calm because nervous customers can make bad decisions. He said he had called a couple places and nobody wanted to come out that late. I told him I would check it quickly and we would see if it was something simple that could get him back on the road without needing a tow. I popped the hood and started with the same routine I use every time, because routine keeps you accurate when it is cold, dark, and you are working near moving traffic. I asked him to sit in the driver's seat and turn the key while I listened at the front. When he tried, there was no sound at all. No click from the starter, no dimming of lights, no relay noise. That usually means the car is not receiving power or it cannot complete the circuit back to the battery. I went straight to the battery posts with my light. There was some corrosion, the white and green crust you see when a terminal has been exposed to moisture, but it was not horrible. Still, even moderate corrosion can increase resistance. I grabbed the cables and tried to wiggle them. The positive felt mostly tight, but the negative side did not feel right. So I traced the negative cable down to where it connects to the chassis. That is where the whole problem was hiding. The ground strap was old and frayed, and the terminal at the chassis end was barely hanging on. It looked like the metal had been fatigued over years of vibration and heat cycles, and the wire strands were oxidized. If that terminal loses contact for even a second, the car can die instantly. The engine computer shuts off, the fuel pump stops, the ignition stops, and the lights go out because the system cannot return current. I pointed it out to him and explained it in plain terms. I told him the battery may be fine, the alternator may be fine, and the engine may be fine. But the car cannot work without a solid ground. He looked relieved because he expected something expensive. I told him I could do an emergency repair to get him moving, but the best fix is replacing the whole strap with a new one as soon as possible. Then I got to work. First, I removed what was left of the loose connection. I cleaned the chassis contact point with a wire brush and sandpaper until I saw clean bare metal. Paint and rust are the enemy of grounds. Then I cut the cable back a little to reach clean copper, because if you crimp onto dirty wire, you are building in a future failure. I pulled a ring terminal from my kit, slid it onto the cable, and crimped it down hard. I do not do light crimps on the roadside because vibration will shake a weak crimp loose. I also reinforced it with a second crimp point and wrapped it with tape to keep moisture out for the drive home. The weather was not friendly. A light mist had started and the wind made it feel colder than it really was. Every time a car passed, the air pushed against me and reminded me that you cannot get careless out there. I kept my body on the shoulder side as much as possible and stayed aware of traffic sounds. When the terminal was secure, I bolted it down tight to the clean chassis point. After that, I checked the battery clamp on the negative post and tightened it, because sometimes the terminal looks okay, but it is loose enough to lose contact on bumps. I also looked at the positive clamp and gave it a quick check, because if one side is neglected, the other side often is too. Once everything felt solid, I asked him to turn the key to the on position without cranking. The dash lit up immediately. That is a good sign because it tells you power is back. I told him to switch on the headlights. They were bright, not dim like before. Then I told him to crank it. The engine started on the first try and settled into a smooth idle. I watched it for a few minutes because a ground problem can come back if the connection is still weak. I checked the alternator output with my multimeter, and it was charging normally. I also checked for a voltage drop between the battery negative and the chassis under load. The reading looked stable, which meant the ground path was doing its job. I told him to let it idle for a bit so the battery could recover, and I repeated the advice that the permanent fix is a new ground strap. He nodded and said he had been driving for hours and needed to get home. I understood that, but I still needed to close out the service like any professional call. I started packing my tools back into my bag, one by one, because losing a tool on the roadside is easy and expensive. I wiped my hands with a rag and walked toward his window to talk through the final steps. As I walked up to the driver's side, I expected the normal ending to a roadside call. Usually the customer is relieved, they say thank you, they ask what they owe, and we make sure the car is safe to drive. I was not looking for a big moment or a dramatic reaction, just basic respect and a clean close, but his body language was different. Instead of relaxing, he looked like he was still in a hurry, almost like he was trying to leave before we even finished talking. I told him again that he should replace the cable soon, and that if he shut the car off right there, he might be dealing with the same failure again if the old strap was worse than it looked. I also mentioned that he should avoid rough bumps for the rest of the drive because a weak ground connection can fail under vibration. He kept nodding, but his eyes were not on me. They were on the road. Then he said something simple, like he was trying to sound normal. He said, "I will be right back." I assumed he meant he would pull forward to a safer, brighter area, maybe the next exit or a nearby gas station lot, so we could handle payment and I could give him one more quick check without cars flying by. I stepped back and gave him room to move, because I did not want to stand in front of his car on the shoulder. He put the car in drive. He glanced at me for a fraction of a second through the window. Then he accelerated hard and merged into the highway lanes like he was running from something. I stood there and watched his taillights shrink into the distance until they disappeared. For a few seconds, I honestly thought he might come back, Like maybe he was just moving to a safer spot. But the road stayed empty, and the darkness swallowed his car. That is the moment it hit me that he was not coming back. He had just taken the repair and left without paying, without thanking me, without even checking whether I could safely get back to my car. I stood on the shoulder with my headlamp still on, rag in my hand, and a weird mix of disbelief and calm. I did not yell, I did not chase, and I did not do anything reckless, because you do not solve disrespect with danger, but inside, it bothered me more than I expected. Not only because of the money, even though the money matters because tools, fuel, and time are not free. What bothered me was the lack of basic decency. I left my house at midnight, drove out there, worked in cold wind with traffic rushing by, and got him out of a risky situation, and he decided my effort was worth nothing. That kind of behavior tells you a lot about a person. I walked back to the front of his car out of habit, then realized there was nothing else to do. I double-checked that I had not left any tool on the ground. I looked around with my light, because sometimes a socket rolls into a ditch, and you do not notice until later. Once I was sure everything was accounted for, I went back to my car. Sitting in my driver's seat for a moment, I took a breath and let the situation settle. People think being a mechanic is mostly engines and parts, but a big part of this work is dealing with people in stressful moments. Most customers are honest and grateful. Some are anxious but fair. Then you get someone like this, someone who will take advantage of a service that happens in the dark where they think there are no consequences. I drove away calm, but the ride home felt different. The road felt longer, quieter, and my mind replayed the scene over and over, not because I wanted drama, but because I could not understand how someone could accept help and then treat the helper like that. By the time I got closer to home, I started thinking less about the individual and more about what this means for how I run my work. When I got home, I sat for a while and thought about it, because experiences like that can either make you bitter or make you smarter. I chose to learn from it. In a controlled shop environment, you have work orders, you have cameras, you have a front counter, and you have clear steps. On the roadside at night, you have none of that. You have darkness, weather, traffic, and a stranger you just met. That means you need policies that protect your safety and your business. After that night, I adjusted how I handle late calls. I still want to help people, because I know what it feels like to be stuck. I have been the person on the side of the road before, and I know the relief when someone shows up who actually knows what they are doing. But I also know that my time has value, my tools have value, and my knowledge is what gets the job done. So now I confirm the location first. I explain the minimum service charge up front, and I make it clear that payment is handled before the vehicle leaves. Not in an aggressive way, just professional and clear. Honest customers respect clarity. They do not argue about a fair minimum for an after-hours call. Another change I made is that I do a quick identity check when I can, like confirming the name tied to the phone number, or having the customer text me a clear location plus the vehicle plate or a photo of the car. It is not about accusing people. It is about keeping the transaction real and reducing the chances of someone trying to vanish. I also remind myself to trust my instincts. If someone refuses to confirm basic details, if they avoid simple questions, if they rush in a way that feels like they are trying to get you to work without any agreement, that is a warning sign. Stress is normal when someone is stranded, but dishonesty has its own tone. At the same time, I do not let one bad person erase the good experiences. I have had plenty of calls where people surprised me in a good way. I have had customers who insisted on paying extra because it was late and dangerous. I have had people offer water, snacks, even a jacket when they saw me working in the cold. I have had drivers stop and ask if we were safe, which is rare but appreciated. Those moments remind you that there are still good people out there. But I will not pretend what happened that night was nothing. It was a real reminder that the automotive service world is not only about diagnostics and repairs, it is also about business, communication, and boundaries. The car problem that night was simple once I found it. A ground connection, a basic electrical path. Something that can shut a vehicle down instantly and make it look like the car is dead. That part was straightforward. The human part was the hard part. The human part is what turns a normal call into something you remember. And if you do any kind of service work, you already know this is true. The technical skill gets you started, but professionalism is what keeps you in business. I still take pride in the fact that I got that car running and got that driver out of danger, even if he did not deserve it. I did my work correctly, and I did it safely. That matters to me. But I also learned to set terms before I open the hood, especially at midnight on the shoulder of a highway. That is the real lesson I took home. If you want to keep hearing more things that have happened to me while working on cars, and more surprising situations I have seen in the automotive world, make sure you follow and subscribe to the channel. And if you liked this video and it gave you something to think about, please give it a like. That helps me a lot, and it helps this channel reach more people who appreciate real-life experiences from the road and the shop. Thank you for listening, and I will see you in the next one.